Are you in a co-parenting relationship? Are you and your spouse or ex-spouse able to maintain a good family unit, take care of the children, and continue to live as a comfortable family? Today on the show, I've got JP Marsh, who is a co-parenting relationship expert. He's working with families to help them maintain a positive family dynamic and ensure, whatever the situation, that the two parents can act as a unit and continue to live a good family life with their children. This is Shifting Views with Willis. Okay, JP Marsh, welcome to the podcast. Thank you for being on today.
Of course. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Just to set some context for the audience, a co-parenting relationship expert. That's what I've described you as. Is that an accurate description?
Yeah. About as accurate as it's going to get. I've been in a healthy co-parenting relationship for the last 7 plus almost 8 years with my daughter's mother. And, we've gone from the conflict to being collaborative, and the collaboration now to the extent of, doing the holidays together, the school functions, the barbecues, the lake trips, and all these different things, transitioning from, the fighting and the bickering and at each other's throats to my daughter now being in a blended family on that side. And so being on the same page and understanding that it takes a village to raise a child. And so that's what we're all sort of trying to do, instead of having, being in a situation where the kid can, the child can pit parents against each other, or, dictate where they want to go because, I can do this at mom's house, or I can do this at dad's house, and I want to go where I get the most entitlement or leeway, or, all that kind of stuff. There's 3 major hurdles, I guess you would say, and it doesn't really matter what side you're on, how long you've been separated, even if you're not even separated anymore, that everybody sort of gets tripped up on. But once you can kind of work your way through them, then everything starts to get, at least you can start to have some stability. You may not become best friends or become in a relationship where you can do the barbecues and be around each other constantly, but there's still something to be said about civility, communication, and all those sorts of things.
More and more people are living in, I guess, what we would call broken homes, where the mum and dad have separated, but you're both still responsible for the children. Perhaps you've gone and developed new families with new partners and had different children, whatever. So that becomes a challenge, doesn't it? Because as you was just alluding to there, lots of children maybe get confused by that because they're going between 2 different homes. There's the age-old thing of playing mum and dad off against each other, which is, kind of acting out, I suppose. There's that element that comes with it. And I suppose really what underpins that is almost a form of trauma in a way,
right.
That when the parents have separated and the family unit is broken, children, they don't really know how to deal with it. And I guess a lot of parents don't really know how to manage that situation. And is that what you're finding?
Yeah, for sure. But children are sponges, and they're a lot more perceptive and aware than I think a lot of adults want to give them credit for. And so if, you have the mom and the dad at 2 separate houses, but they can't get along, and the child is watching each one sort of badmouth, downplay, belittle the other one, whether it's to their face or just in the air around the children, then the children aren't going to respect it either parent, because both parents are don't respect each other. You know what I mean? And so you're breeding this culture of, I do what I want, I'm the most important, and as long as I get what I want, it doesn't matter, because my parent, I'm sitting here listening to my parents just degrade each other nonstop.
Sure.
And so why should I have respect for them? Or, you're modeling your behavior, and your kids are going to pick it up. And so if you're not respectful to other people, they're not going to be respectful to you, obviously,
Yeah. And you say you have a good relationship with your children and with your ex-partner. Mm-hmm. Is that something that's taken time to develop, or did you agree when you separated and said, look, our relationship is over, but we have responsibilities here, and this is how we're going to work? Or is this something that really just takes time to figure out?
It takes time. The first brick or the first step is that both parents have to actually put the children first, have the best interests of the children first. And so, when I'm working with people or talking to people that are still in the conflict or the recent breakup, or even if they've been broken up for, a decade, the thing that I got to get people to realize first is you got to leave your own pity party. You know what I mean? And change the view of that person. Because if you can't get out of your own emotional damage and the trauma or the baggage and all of these other things, you can't become a unified team to raise the best child. You know what I mean? And to be on the same page and be able to communicate. And so the hardest but the most important step, is sort of getting out of your own way. And there's little things that you can do that make leaps and bounds, and it takes time, but I had to come to terms with that. I was probably most of the problem. You know what I mean? When we were in conflict and had, a fairly new breakup and all that stuff, I was instantly defensive when it really had no reason to be defensive, just because, out of habit more than anything.
Yeah.
And once I reframed the way that I saw my daughter's mother, reacted to my daughter's mother, and the words that I was using to define my daughter's mother started to change the way that I perceived the way that she, who she was as a person. Because I don't ever say my ex, because that's not who she is in my life anymore. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
So you take those emotional strings or emotional ties and start cutting them. Then you can see them as the other parent. She's my daughter's mother. She's not my ex at this point.
Yeah.
And so it makes it easier because you're not dragging this baggage into every conversation.
Yeah.
When the conversation should be focused on kids. You know what I mean?
Sure. Yeah. That's a really interesting mindset. And I really like that because even just using that terminology of saying, my ex-wife or my ex-husband immediately comes with a negative connotation, doesn't it? It immediately says, the former, we are no more, it's an end. It's that kind of negative connotation. And whenever anyone uses that term ex, you immediately think that they're at war with each other, or it's a negative experience. But the way you refer to it is you say, it's my daughter's mother. And that's a much more healthy, positive sound, isn't it? Immediately, because that's the guardian of your child, or the other guardian of your child. And that's a very different dynamic, which I find really interesting.
Right. And you could see it. I mean, if whoever's listening and if you watch what happens when you say X on the people that you're talking to's faces, as opposed to when you say my child's mother or father.
Yeah.
Because their facial expressions will tell you the emotions that are tied to those different phrases or words. You know what I mean? And then once you start to notice that other people's reactions are way different, you'll notice that your internal reaction, because the next thing that comes into your mind isn't clouded, isn't grayed with negativity or hurt feelings or anger or shame or whatever emotional damage and baggage that you're carrying from the failed relationship sort of aspect,
Yeah. No, what I found really interesting as well, and I think if you take the emotion out of it and forget about that we're talking about parents and children for a moment, raising a child as parents in a way is kind of like a project. It's something that you have a responsibility for, and you want it to be successful, just like anything else that you run. And with that comes conversations, meetings, agreements, all of that sort of stuff. And I don't want to make it particularly clinical or businessy or anything like that, but I do think the two worlds cross over between kind of like how we would act with any other thing we were responsible for, whether that was a business or a project or a sports team or whatever it might be. You have to have this collaboration. And when you're a parent of a child, your sole responsibility is to make sure that child is healthy, has good morals, good values, grows up to be a good adult, and as a team of managers, almost, your job is to try and make that happen. Is that a good way to think about it? Or is that taking all the emotion out of it? It's much deeper than that,
Well, it is. And like anything else in life, you're in constant negotiations with everybody and everything around you to get the best outcomes and deals that you can possibly make, whether you want to acknowledge it or not. My daughter's 9 years old. I negotiate bedtime with her. I negotiate what's for dinner. I negotiate what sports she's going to play this year, what holidays, you know what I mean? We're constantly negotiating. But I'm also negotiating with her mom to an extent, which getting out of the, once you can separate and deal with, the emotional baggage that is obviously comes with the breakup or divorce or, and these different things, then you can kind of shift into this collaborative sort of better communication. The better the communication, the better the collaboration and the less competition. Sure. Because what you find with a lot of people is they become in competition with the other parent who can take the kids on the best vacations, who can do bigger Christmases, who has the bigger house, who has the nicer cars, who has da. You know what I mean? Yeah. And once you can get more to the collaboration and less of the competition and just, I get a lot of these venting messages or, way to go, Dad. You're taking them to Disneyland this summer when all I could afford was to take them to the water park 3 towns over. Way to one up me, da. And it's like, you're looking at that through your hurt feeling lens.
Yeah. Rather
than, oh my God, my kids get to go on this awesome experience. Now, maybe I'm not the one taking them there, but my kids still get to experience something that there's probably 85% of the kids in the United States will never actually go and do or see. Sure. But your kids get to. So why not be happy that they get to go to that experience? You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
Here we have Thanksgiving coming up here in a couple months in the US. And my daughter and her mother and their family and some other families that we all sort of interact with and hang out with a bunch of kids the same age, they're all going to the Dominican Republic for Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
Which is great, have fun. And, obviously they were like, well, you're invited, and I'm like, oh yeah, I'll miss this trip, but it's just not my idea of a vacation. But
yeah,
you know what I mean? Like, I'm happy that my daughter gets to go there and go have that experience. And it's not a jealousy thing. I don't need to try to plan some other huge extravagant trip just to show that I'm, and so once you get the competition out of the way, and you can communicate, then everything just runs smoother and everybody's happier.
And I actually think, as you said earlier on in the podcast, children are sponges and are quite intuitive. And I actually think that's what most children want. They want the security of a loving parent that is able to guide them, advise them, discipline them, all of that, everything that comes with being a parent, teaching them the way of the world, if you like. And actually, I the less about the stuff. I actually don't think, it's nice to have, but I don't think that's what they panic about or really overthink about. They actually think about, am I happy at home, whether that's mum's home or dad's home, either way, do I feel like I have a good, stable life? They might not think it in, am I safe? Yeah, they might not think about it in such adult terms, but, fundamentally, that's what's underpinning their thought process. What I wanted to ask you about actually is how you manage the dynamic. So I don't have children, but I am from that experience where, I grew up with a mum and a stepdad who I would now see as, I would just see him as my dad. I wouldn't see him as a stepdad really, just because that's what my life has become and that's how I see it. But of course, with that, I always find it's hard to be a step parent. Because especially if the children are older, because there's this kind of balance of like, well, you're not really their dad and they have a dad and their dad is the one that's supposed to tell them the way and discipline and all that kind of stuff. And so when the kids are acting out, maybe mum is kind of trying to straighten them out. But actually the stepdad, for example, maybe feels he can't really do that because it's, it's not his role almost.
Right.
And it sits back and stays quiet. How do you manage that? How do you work that dynamic?
It's kind of a broken record thing to say, but it's all about communication. The more that you can communicate and the more that you communicate and the more that you can communicate openly is going to be your best policy and the easiest way to navigate any hurdles or obstructions or any of these situations that come up. The better of a relationship that you can have and the more that you can communicate, then it's easy to define roles, responsibilities, and reactions, I guess you would say.
Sure.
When my daughter thankfully doesn't really act out, is a really good kid.
Yeah.
Has needed very little as far as discipline. Probably too smart for her own good, but kid.
Yeah.
But as far as her stepdad, when it comes to disciplinary stuff, I'll get the calls or text messages a lot, from her mom. Like, you need to have a talk with Adeline about XYZ, or what's going on at school and this and that. My situation makes it easy because we live in a rural area in a small town. We're only about 6 blocks away from each other. She comes and goes as she pleases, but if she's grounded there, she's grounded here, she's grounded off tablet there, she's grounded off tablet here. Same kind of food gets cooked. You're eating what we make.
Yeah.
Disciplinary style backgrounds of our childhoods are similar enough. It's all sort of the same values and moral systems, as that goes with it. But it starts with me, and then relied, with the communication that trickles to her mother, as far as, you respect the people that are in authority positions over you. Yeah. He's part of your household. And if it's not allowed, even if it's something that doesn't irk me or I'm fine with, it doesn't mean that you can take it there and do those things there. You're not going to speak to him disrespectfully. You're not going to badmouth him. You're not going to talk back to him. If he says you need to get this done, get it done. You know what I mean? And if problems arise, then, when it's a talking to or something that needs to be sort of explained and stuff, I tend to be more patient and be able to explain it to where she understands like what she did wrong or why that behavior is unacceptable and this and that. But, as far as we've talked about, there's not really anything that he could do that would necessarily be overstepping. You know what I mean?
Yeah, sure.
If anything that, the only thing that would cause a flag for me or cause any sort of static, I guess you would say, between us in our whole situation would be if she was being treated differently than he treats his son. You know what I mean? Like if his kid can do it and then all of a sudden she's getting hammered because she was doing the same thing, then that might cause friction. But we haven't really ran into any sort of conflict like that.
What's interesting to me, and another thing I really wanted to ask you about, is whenever I think of co-parenting relationships or like separated couples that are both you've got children together. Typically, whenever the conversation happens, I always think, I'm talking very generally here, but I always think that it's the dad that seems to come worse off in the conversation. And, straight question to you. Do you think fathers get a raw deal?
Yes.
Why do you think that is? What's driving that?
Money.
Yeah.
I think mostly, at least in the United States, because, and most probably it's probably very similar in all Western type culture areas, whether we're talking Australia, the UK, Canada, all these places where it's sort of first world countries, first world problems, that kind of stuff, because we have a lot more of this. The divorce rate's a lot higher in our type of countries. The, single parent households, even if you go and meet somebody on the street, if you're, 25-year-old plus adult, you have a 50-50 chance of, 1 out of every 2 people that you meet is going to be a single parent if they're single. Right.
Yeah.
And so if you're married, then if, in the US, then you have to go through the court system to do all of your child custody and all of these different things. And for the most part, if you're the dad, you're basically going to be stuck paying the mother of your children to babysit your children while you work extra hours to afford to pay her to babysit your children.
Yeah.
because that's the way it's always been. And legal counsel will actually kind of tell you not to waste all of the money that you have to try to get your kids, because you're not going to, I mean, statistically, you're not going to win. More times than not, the only way that the dad gets custody or anything like that is if the mom says no, and doesn't contest it, or she is a complete mess, right? I mean, that's about the only way that you ever see the dads have the majority of custody. And it's
because this happens, doesn't it? This happens all the time. And I know lots of people in this situation. You know, again, it's a common occurrence, but it's always the children going to see the dad at the weekend, or going to stay with dad with the weekend. It's very rarely like dad has custody and they're going to mum's for the weekend. There seems to be a lack of understanding that of the male role in a child's life, and I think this is so important.
It is, yeah. Right. Well, I mean, statistically in the U.S., 85% of the people in the U.S. prison system were raised by single mother with, fatherless homes.
Yeah.
Girls are 4 times more likely to be pregnant by 16, 3 times more likely to be obese. Suicide rates almost double for teenagers with that fatherless homes. You know what I mean? And these are all like statistics. But a father in the home, or the dad being present, mirrors and is really, really similar to the nuclear family, the normal sort of family household and all these things. But in my mind, I think that the system's outdated, but it's also such a big money funnel between the divorce court, the legal fees, the child support, the state involvement, the government involvement, the mediation hearings, the parenting planning, and all these things that are court ordered when you're figuring all this stuff out.
Yeah.
And it just bleeds people dry. Whereas, we're still living in the system is still set for, a very small percentage of divorce rate in the 1960s, where the wives were more homemakers and the husbands went to work. So
sure.
Obviously, females weren't making any money, so child support made sense so that they could still live and survive, because they had no work experience, and there was a smaller job market because of the times and these things and those things. But, catching up to this era or this generation, in my mind, I think that it should be a 50-50, everything. Custody, you get divorced, everything goes 50-50, right? No child support, no one way or the other. And if somebody is lacking or deserves, you know what I mean? I think that you should that should be the starting point, rather than the mom having full everything and the dad having to fight just to get, 6-8 days a month, if they're lucky.
Yeah.
If you started everything at even par, because you're both the parent.
Yeah.
Then if one person can prove that the other person is not responsible enough, not secure enough, financially secure enough, stable enough, whether, you start throwing in some of these other things.
Yeah.
Then that's how you change to go, week on or every other weekend for the dad. He pays child support because now she's got the kids more than 50-50.
Yeah.
And
I mean, I guess what you're saying is it should be the exception rather than the rule kind of thing, because I find it so interesting. And I guess like your role in a way in what you do is to almost try and help avoid these scenarios happening. So you talked about going to courts, divorce lawyers, custody battles, maintenance, all that kind of stuff. And the ideal situation is, unfortunately, adults do split up, they grow apart, and that's just the way of the world. But you've got children, and hopefully you're in a good relationship enough to say, okay, well, we aren't working anymore, but we need to work out how we're going to move forward with the children, the people we've produced, because that's our role to do that. And hopefully you come to a nice agreement between you and say, look, let's work together and make it happen. Outside of that, your own personal lives are your own personal lives. That's a different world. But that it seems to be so rare that that happens. And,
Right.
typically it's we've separated, and the first thing that comes to mind is, right, well, who's going to have the kids? I'm going to get a lawyer or a solicitor, or as we would say.
Right. Right.
That seems to be the go-to point. And it sounds like from what you was just describing there, you know, we've not really kept up with the times. What was the world in the 1950s isn't the world in 2024. But the system seems to continue to work in that kind of fashion.
Well, yeah.
How do you change that? How do you move that?
I mean, I see. Like in my situation, we don't have any court involvement. Like there's nothing. Like everything that we have figured out, we figured out on our own. The schedule we figured out on the own. Money we figured out on our own. Everything, But we were an unmarried couple.
Yeah.
But when you're married, you're already in the system. You're legally bound together. And then when the divorce gets filed, then whoever files paperwork to get you put into the system is usually the one that stipulates what they want. And then the other person spends the rest of their money to fight it, to try to refute all these different stipulations, time, custodial parent, yada, yada, yada. Yeah. And, anytime that you're bringing in outside entities that are financially driven, not driven by what's actually best. You know what I mean? Because, and it's, the majority of the people that are sort of get it the worst are your average men who are doing what they're supposed to be doing in their marriage, which is working 50, 60 hours a week, 70 hours a week, in a labor, blue collar type job that's long hours on a job site, all these things.
Yeah.
Providing for the family. And then when that divorce happens, then that's used against them because they're not around enough.
Sure.
You know what I mean? They don't have the time to spend with their kids. So then now, since, you're paying, $1,000 a kid or whatever it is, depending on the state and how much money you make, if you're, an average income, even, and it's probably lower than 52,000, but we'll say $52,000 a year, $1,000 a week.
Yeah. Now
you're paying 1/4 of your income to support your child at mom's house. So now all of a sudden you got to work 20 hours of overtime every week. So then you're working 60 hours a week to cover that extra money so you can afford to live. You know what I mean? And so obviously you don't have time, and it's just this real vicious circle, because then that you not having time is used against you, because you got to make that extra money to be able to live for yourself so you can pay them to babysit your kids while you're at work. And it's just this revolving door. But the more that you get the state involved, and the more that the government's involved in any sort of thing in your life, the worse you're going to be. If you want the next generation to be better than the generation that we have right now that are in their early 20s, then they need both parents around, but they also need two role models that are emotionally stable and have emotional intelligence and are able to communicate and able to have difficult conversations and able to stand up for themselves and just be, responsible human beings. Whereas you take one parent out of the dynamic and you start running into these emotionally erratic, very immature, very easily influenced type human beings, and everybody knows the importance of having both parents, or at least, a good foundation in the household. You need the fathers in certain age groups to guide. A father makes his daughter a lady, and a father makes a son a man.
Yeah.
Without the father, the boy grows up to be an adult, and the girl will grow up to be a woman. But there's a big difference between an adult and a woman and a lady and a man. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And at least in the US, it's such a big rolling machine that it's hard to comprehend it ever being changed. Or, the less that people are getting married, the easier it's going to be, because you're not wrapped up in the system if you split up. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But you have this big machine where you're wrapped into the court systems, where you ask the court systems to get married. They give you a marriage license. If you get divorced, they're involved in it. They also generate all this income and everything off of the custody and all of these different things. But then you jump 10 years, 15 years, depending how old the kids are. If you take the father completely out of the picture, 85 to 90% of the people that are wrapped up in the court system as adults for crimes come from fatherless homes.
Yeah, yeah.
So they're generating their own clients later in life. The divorce court is generating the clients for the court system of everybody that's 18 years old to 40. The ones that are from the broken homes where the court system got involved, took the kids, they lost their male role model, lost their fathers, lost their guidance, lost their all these different things, become emotionally erratic. And I mean, this is mostly for like the boys or the young men that are losing their fathers because now they don't know how to have control over their emotions. They become emotionally erratic, go off impulsive behavior, commits crimes, or they become, unable to control their emotions. And that's where you get a lot of the domestic violence. And that's where you get a lot of the theft. And that's where you get a lot of the drug use. And that's where you get a lot of the numbing and the addiction and the drinking and the car wrecks and all these different things that are, big money makers for all the court systems and prison systems when they become adults.
Yeah. No, JP, this is so interesting. And as we're coming towards the end of this pod, you've actually already answered the question I was going to ask you. But it'd be good to just expand on it just a little bit more slightly, which is really the effect of a broken home, essentially, the impact of a broken home or a dysfunctional family on society and life choices. Now, you've just talked a little bit about what some of that actually means,
right?
But recently, in the UK right now, we have an issue where all the prisons are full. Literally, the prisons are full. So they're actually releasing prisoners early because they haven't got the space to the point that they can't even arrest people because they've got nowhere to put them. Now, of course, there's lots of gimmicks and things that politicians will come out with to try and solve that problem. But I made a video a few weeks ago and I said, listen, if you want to solve the prison problem, you've got to go way back into the actual root of why people are getting into this situation in the first place. And it's usually something to do with poverty, inequality, broken home, abuse, something like that. You've got to go way back into that. Why would someone make that bad decision? Why would someone go into drugs? Why would someone hurt that person? Whatever it might be. Because all of us are born equally human and, generally in the Western world, at least, nice human beings. It's a turn of events that makes us do things or go down different directions. And definitely, without doubt, and you've quoted some of the stats there, but definitely without doubt, having a broken home, a dysfunctional parent relationship, typically a father missing from the situation is no doubt that's a massive influence. So do you think that your role in what you're doing is as much to help families and children kind of keep a cohesive relationship and a good family value, but do you also think you almost have a knock-on effect in what the future is looking like? And does that impact how you do what you do?
I'm conscious and aware of it, I guess you'd say, at least. Every situation's a little bit different, and mine's different than a lot of people's, but also very similar. I mean, same as anything else, it all starts with you, right? I mean, the more involved you're going to be with your kids, even if you have limited amounts of time.
Yeah.
Don't be working on your side projects. Don't be working on your car in the driveway when you have your kids. If you have your kids 6-8 days a month, spend those days with them. You have the rest of your time that you don't have your kids to do your home projects, do all these things that are outside of your normal work and that kind of stuff. So, being intentional with your time and being involved and not getting wrapped up in a lot of these naysay stuff, you know what I mean? It's easy to follow the societal norm of, I have to hate them because we broke up and all these different things. And once you can get out of your own way, but your kids need you because, you know, it sounds like your situation with your stepdad, who you would refer to, you know, more as your dad, would be somewhat of an outlier type of a dynamic for a household system, because most of the time now the stepdad comes in and he has all the responsibility but none of the authority.
Yeah, exactly.
And so, you know, they don't get to have any rules. They don't, you know, it's not my kid, it's all these different things. And so, you know, that's one excuse I hear a lot from single mothers. Well, I have a new, you know, he's got a stepdad, or, you know, there's another man in the house and stuff like that. But it's like, if he doesn't have authority and you don't respect him, then it doesn't matter if they're there or not, because it's not your, you know, they need their dad to be around.
And JP, and that's, I was just going to say, well, that's exactly what I was referring to earlier on, which I just find so interesting, that dynamic, because if the biological parent is on the scene and they're co-parenting, then you can have that communication, and you've explained earlier on how you need to do that. But if that parent isn't on the scene and it is single mum, and mum meets a new man, and now the man comes into the family, but, you know, as you say, he has all of the responsibility of being the man of that house, but actually none of the authority. And I find that's such a difficult dynamic for any guy, or if you flip reverse it, any woman to deal with, that would be so difficult.
And those are some of those things that you don't really think about, but you're teaching your children, whether it's conscious or unconsciously, that you don't respect any authority. You don't respect outside influences. So even when they grow up, they're not going to have respect for systems, police, laws, other people's boundaries. You know what I mean? And most of the time they'll mirror the, you know, not saying this as a shot at females or women, you know what I mean? But then it's very dangerous to raise, especially men, to be ran by emotions without control, which women are more emotional and run off feelings and how it makes me feel and how it's said, and then all of these different things, as opposed to most men who, you know, men who are raised with their fathers. But when you raise kids to run off feelings and emotions, that's where you get these emotional explosions. And when their emotions boil over and they didn't have their fathers around, or a good male influence role model, somebody to help guide them in life, then that's when you get these, you know, school shooting situations, these violent offenders, these, you know, guys that have no boundaries as far as romantic relationships, sexual conduct. You know what I mean? That's where you get these abusive, violent, explosive personality type men, because they're running off of their emotions, which isn't normal biologically for a man to do. You know, and when you can't control your emotions, or you're sort of letting them control you, you get these explosions and you get these erratic behaviors, which, you know, leads to the prison systems, leads to the violent offenders, the repeat offenders, you know, I can't deal with my emotions, so I'm going to numb myself with drugs, and then the drugs lead to theft, and the theft leads to violence, and just that rotating door of that never ends. And so, you know, it goes back to a very young age.
Absolutely.
Of morals and values. And if, you know, if you can't get along and agree on time and scheduling and be able to communicate and be on the same page and be in it for your children, then you run the risk of them not having both sides of of what they need to develop to be able to socialize properly, integrate into different sorts of communication styles, social circles, business. You know what I mean? I mean, it's going to have a spider web effect coming out in all directions. And a lot of those outcomes aren't going to be very good. You'll see the old saying of it takes a village to raise a child.
Mm-hmm.
And it really is starting to get lost with the overconnectedness of technology, but the complete disconnect that came along with the connectedness of technology. Because when I was a kid, when you were a kid, you had grandparents, and so you were sponging some of their points of views. And you had your parents, and you had your aunts and uncles, and the neighbors, and your friends' parents, and you heard you had all of these interpretations and viewpoints that you were seeing all the time, because you were actually physically around people and listening to conversations and being a part of conversations. Even if you were a little kid and they're having conversations around you, you're still interpreting it. Now you have people that are, sad to say, more cave dwelling kids who are on tablets, computers, TV, social media, gaming stations. And so the only points of view and world points of view and societal norms and all of these things that they're interpreting are one track, because they only are getting it from a mother or a father. And even in a 2-parent household, if they don't go and get other points of view from around them, then it's hard for them to be open-minded to see other ways of thinking, other cultures, other viewpoints. And then that's when you start getting these, one-track mind. You either agree with me or you're wrong. Everything's inclusion as long as your viewpoints are aligned with mine, which breeds into these I'm right, you're wrong, I'll do anything to make that clear, which, you could almost, if you really dwelled into these guys that have been, I don't know how much the news travels, but, Trump has had 2 people make attempts on his life in the last month.
Yeah.
And it's that sort of one-track mind. You know what I mean? I'm right, you're wrong, I'll do anything to stop you. Yeah. Instead of being able to see other points of view or be able to and it makes it dangerous. It makes it really dangerous to be in a world with people that are like that.
Yeah, I think so. I agree. And I think it affects adulthood as well, ultimately, and careers and business and all that. It's the basic soft skills that I think so many kids miss out on. How to shake somebody's hand, how to look them in the eye, how to make an argument, how to
have difficult conversations,
how to put forward ideas, how to make a case for you. There's so many things which you learn through your schooling and being around your peers and all these kind of things, but there's so many factors that can really knock that off course. And I absolutely agree with you that being around, absorbing what's happening in society, what your neighbors, your friends' parents, your grandparents, whatever, these people all are informing what you become, your character, right, how you are. And I always think that if you're in a stable, strong family unit, the likelihood is you're going to be exposed to more of that, because that it almost facilitates that to happen. And I don't mean, you can be separated parents, but you're you're a stable unit. You're a stable family. Right. Whereas if somebody's missing from that boat, then I think it affects what your life becomes, because your exposure to things is different, or it's from one perspective, from one side, and it leads to all the things that you've just said, which makes perfect sense. So I guess your message really is that, listen, whatever the situation with your relationship, if you're parents, then you need to learn, you need to be able to work together, and you need to be able to work as a family unit. Even if you're not a family in that context, you're still right, parents, and you still have children, and that's what you're trying to do ultimately.
Right. And I try to, and getting parents to understand that it's a lifelong thing. I get a lot of these comments, and you see a lot of people, and you've probably heard it from people too, that were in bad situations with their co-parent, where they're like, well, as soon as my kids are graduate high school or get out of school and they're out on their own and have their own lives, then I don't have to deal with that person anymore. Once they're 18, then I don't have to deal with the other parent anymore. And it's like, you couldn't be more wrong.
Yeah.
Because if you can't be in the same room, who gets to go to the wedding? Who gets to go to your first grandchild's birth? Be at the hospital? who's going to babysit, who gets to go to Thanksgivings or Christmases or New Year's or babies, all of these things. You're connected to that person for the rest of your life. Now it's your choice if you want it to be difficult and stressful and confrontational or civil and communicative, being able to communicate and agreeable, and it's a give and take. I mean, there's some compromises that have to be made, and you got to stop looking at everything through a hurt, feelings lens and, get rid of all these double standards because people are crazy about just double standarding everything. I can do it, but if they do it, it's a huge issue and I'm going to cause a big old fight about it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like they're allowed to have a life when they don't have the kids. They can have a life. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's so interesting, this whole thing, and I also think just on this final point, the lifelong thing of being a parent. Strangely enough, I had this conversation with a friend the other day, and we were saying, because I don't have children, he does have children. We had this conversation. I was saying, when you had your children, was it even a conversation around, okay, what are we committing to here? On the assumption you've planned to have children, right. What are we committing to here? Aside from the financial side of it and all the rest of it, that's it. That's life. That's your job now until
right.
Your life ends fundamentally. That's what you're there
right.
to do. And we was having this conversation and just picking up on what you was just saying there. I'm 42 now, and I still go to my mum and dad. I still speak to my dad all the time. I ask him advice on all sorts of things, and I always go to them for help because they're your parents. They're the people that have some form of experience, regardless of how old you are or any of that. They are your trusted source of information in a way. You can bounce ideas, you can ask them problems, and they'll give you the most honest response that they can give you because you know that they want to give you the best answer that they can give from their own experience. Right. And that doesn't stop at 18,
No.
No. And that's straight. And I think that's another thing parents need to consider. And if they do separate and they're working out how they move forward and continue to raise their child, I that has to be part of the conversation, doesn't it?
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you take one of the two people out of the equation, voluntarily or not, obviously there are situations, if a parent dies or something like that, where they're no longer able to, that's a whole nother story. But, say, whether it's a boy or a girl, if you take the father away at a young age, then they're constantly bouncing from a male influence to a male influence to a male influence their entire lives. And they're going to be guided by somebody out of, that may or may not have their best interest in mind. And so, the paths go very different sort of directions between a male and a female. I mean, I know when I was younger in high school and in my 20s and stuff, I mean, you knew within a half an hour of meeting a girl, whether or not her dad was involved in her life or not. I mean, you could tell there was personality traits and there was, different things that just were flags, and they became they had this hole that they needed to fill, and they were trying to fill it with males and, male attention. And it's hard for them to be intimate, really connect with somebody, really have an adult relationship and feel fulfilled because that had been missing. So they don't know how to react when they get it. Whereas on the male side, whether it be coach after coach, teacher after teacher, boss after boss, mentor after mentor, they're bouncing from one guiding light to another. And you see it with the sort of, the kid that finds it in the drug dealer, and then the kid becomes a drug dealer, or the mob boss, or the the thieves, or the drug dealers, or the drug addicts, or the partiers, or the sexual predator in their frat house, or whatever the case may be. It can go, they're being conditioned to follow these paths that if they were allowed to have their father in their life or allowed to have their mother in their life the entire time, that's where you get the the father helps the girls be more selective over male partners and relationships and all of these different things, and also helps guide their sons to not be out on the streets doing things that are going to get them, thrown in jail.
In closing, do you have sort of a final message or something? If you had to get a point across to parents that were in these situations or maybe heading towards this situation, what's your kind of core piece of advice to them, would you say?
I would say know the intentions behind every decision. And so do everything intentionally.
Yeah.
But with the intention of your kids being successful, happier, healthier, more well-adjusted. To me, my idea of success at the end of my life is my daughter being a happier, more confident, more caring, more well-rounded, less childhood baggage and trauma to deal with human being than I am.
Yeah.
And if that's the intention of all parents and the way that you set, your goal, then it makes it easier to help make decisions that are going to, guide them into that.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's awesome. Where can people reach out to you? I know you're on Instagram. I know that. What's your Instagram handle so we can put that out there?
At JP Marsh. Just
Okay.
it doesn't have the A in my last name is all.
Okay, cool. So if you feel like you're in this situation, perhaps you have separated, or perhaps you're on the cusp of that happening, you're worried about how to raise your child, how you're going to work together, how you're going to manage these dynamics. There are people out there like JP Marsh who has experience of this, but also can help you and guide you along, and hopefully come to an amicable way of continuing a fulfilling life. JP, this has been so interesting. Thanks so much for being on the podcast. I really appreciate it.
Of course, I had a great time.
Yeah, no, it's been really brilliant, and keep doing what you're doing because I think it's so important. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All the best. Take care.